Hello and welcome back to Conquest Creations. My name is Jacob Lucas, the Conquest Creator, and in this video we're going to go through every single playable force in the Middle-earth strategy battle game and rank them in order. Now to do this we're using Longshanks. This is a website that can be used to track tournaments, and it has over 5,600 games of Middle-earth strategy battle game recorded. So we're going to use these statistics and see which faction's the best and which faction's the worst. This includes all of the legendary legions as well as regular army lists in it. Now there's a couple disclaimers here. Firstly, this is just based on the statistics. There's some armies that are very powerful but are more popular with newer players, so that is going to hamper them. It's going to make them seem worse than the statistics. So the statistics don't necessarily represent how good an army actually is. And the next one is that some of these armies don't have enough games to be properly ranked, so they're included in the order, but they won't be given a ranking number just because there's not enough data on them. And finally, while we have the statistics, I'm also going to be giving you a tier that I think each army fits in. That's going to be underdog tier, good tier, and top tier. All right, let's get started. What army list do you think is the worst in Middle-earth? And well, to start us off is the Wildmen of Druadan with a whopping 22% win rate. Now this only has 30 games under its belt, so don't judge it too harshly. It's not as surprising to see this one down here at the bottom. It's definitely an underdog tier list. You've just got one hero and one quite expensive troop choice that is still only defense 3 and fight 3. So they struggle to hit hard. They've got a lot of numbers though. After the Wildmen, we have the Defenders of the Shire. This one only has 8 games played with it, making it one of the least popular played factions in the whole game, which is pretty interesting because I think hobbits are pretty cool. But obviously, it's a very difficult army to collect. The models are quite expensive and you need a horde of them. You're looking at probably 70 models minimum at 500 points. I don't know, maybe a bit less than that, but it's rough. This one also goes into underdog tier for me because everything's moved 4 and you've got no big central hitting power because they're all hobbits, which are not good at fighting. Next up, in 72nd place, we have the Grey Company. Now, this one is another legendary legion that I would put as an underdog. You have to take Aragorn in it, and then you can take the Rangers of the North. You've got a couple other major hero choices, but its difficulty is that it's such a low model count army that it really just can't hold up, especially when those Rangers of the North are really easy to kill still and have a relatively low fight value. A lot of armies can just rip through it. Now, next up, with only 6 games making it, I think this one is the least popular faction in the whole game, and that's Sharkeys Rouges. Yeah, look, Sharkeys Rouges is, again, just one troop choice and one hero, because this isn't the Legendary Legion. And it's really not very good. You've just got regular humans, all defense 3. There's no hitting power. It's just a horde, but you don't have spears, so it's very difficult to play with. And unsurprising to see it with a 33% win rate. Grey Company also had a 33% win rate. Next up, in 71st place, we have Lurts of Scouts. Now, so far, my personal rating is lining up with what the statistics say, because this is definitely an underdog as well. It's got 56 games under its belt, so a decent performance, but it's only at a 36% win rate, which is pretty abysmal. You don't have spears in this list. It's really fast. You've got some interesting heroes, but ultimately it lacks the punch that it really needs to get above some of the other lists. I do think in a good player's hands, you could absolutely win a tournament with it though. Next up, in 70th place, we have a really popular one, 273 games. It's the Return of the King Legendary Legion. I definitely would have rated this in the good tier, not in the bottom tier, so I'm surprised that it only has a 39% win rate. It is an army that a lot of people get into the game with because it came in the old starter kit, so it's very easy to start. But it's really low model count and really low fight value, so that really hampers its ability to do damage. And while it is very high defense, I don't know, it's still not that maneuverable, and it's the army that a lot of people bring to learn the game. So I think, yeah, as I said, that makes it hard, but was definitely expecting it to be higher. Next up, in the good old 69th place, we have an army list, the Rangers of Fihilien Legendary Legion. Now, this used to be a much higher performing one. These statistics don't go back more than a year, I believe. So a little while ago, they got nerfed. They have to take Frodo, Sam, and Gollum, which is about a 100-point tax, really. So it really limits the amount of bows that they can get in, which just, messes up its whole dynamic, its whole thing. So it only has a 40% win rate. I think pre-nerf, it was definitely top tier. Post-nerf, at higher points, it's probably good tier, but at lower points, it's definitely underdog tier because so many of their points are consumed by Frodo, Sam, and Gollum. Next up, in 68th place, we have the Kingdom of Khazad-dûm. Now this one I'd be pushing between underdog and good tier with 370 games. Now I don't know if I said for Raids of Ithilien, 43 games, 40% win rate. Kingdom of Khazad-dûm is 370 games, 41% win rate. I'm surprised it's so low because it is, I don't know, maybe I'm not surprised. It's rough. I've played it a bit, not much pure, and I haven't won many games with it myself, to be fair. It's got some decent heroes, but it doesn't have any spears and it's very slow, so just about every other army in the game can outmaneuver it. Next up, in 67th place, with 96 games, 41% win rate, is the Army of Gothomg. I definitely would have put this one in the good tier. I think it's still alright. It's basically Mordor, but it doesn't really have any of Mordor tricks, so maybe I see why it's there. I think it's also one that quite a lot of new players play. It's now coming in the starter kit, so that's good. But I think that does definitely diminish its ability to perform. With only 96 games, I think as time goes on, that'll definitely increase because it's in the new starter kit. Next up, with only 12 games under its belt, so with a grain of salt, is the Riders of Umbar. It's got a 42% win rate, and the reason this is unpopular is because it's just Rohan, but worse in every single way, basically. You don't get a lot of the buffs for having Theodred, and you have to take Gandalf the White because he's very expensive, and I think he's pretty good, but a lot of people don't. You can't take Royal Guard, so you're very limited with what you can take in this list, and the benefits just don't outweigh the cons. Next, in 66th place, 139 games, is the Dead of Dunharrow. 42% win rate is pretty bad. Now, I definitely would have put this one in the good tier. Maybe I wouldn't have. Probably would have put it in the underdog tier, eh? I would have put this one above the Return of the King Legendary Legion. Let's say that. It's a Return of the King, but it doesn't have Aragorn. So you're low models, low hitting power, low resources, really high defense and durability with Terra and high defense, but obviously you need more than that to win. Next up, in 65th place, 87 games, 42% win rate, we have the Rangers. I would put this one in underdog tier. I think this is a fair enough place. I know that it can be good. Sean Rosado from The Last Alliance of Noobs and Men has won tournaments with this list, but it's very difficult to use right. You're low model count because everyone's a hero, so you're insanely high on might, but if you go up against a high fight army, they can really just rip you to pieces, and you're low defense on everyone in the Rangers. Next up, in 64th place, is my boys. I wish they were higher. I wish that I could put them in the good tier. They're definitely a solid underdog tier, but that's Thorins Company. Now, they have 53 games under their belt and a 42% win rate, so not fantastic, but this makes sense. It's an all-hero army, which always very difficult to play, very difficult to win with. And yeah, look, they're relatively slow, so it's difficult to get around the board. They're good at fighting, but you need a lot more than that to win, and ultimately 13 models at 750 points just isn't enough. Next up, this one's massively surprising. I would have put this one probably top tier, between top and good tier, I'd say, is Isengard. 484 games and 43% win rate. Now, one of the more competitive lists that I've played and that I've performed very well with in tournaments is my Isengard. I've definitely seen it win lots of tournaments. Again, I think a lot of new players get into the game with Isengard. And I think it sort of has its upper limits. It can be tricky to really get value out of things. It's great if you just go into a shield wall while you have a lot of pikes, but other than that, it doesn't have necessarily some of the hitting power that other armies do have. I'm trying to justify why it's so low, but ultimately it's tough. I think Isengard's great, so I'm surprised to see it there. 62, in 62nd position, we have the Trolls, solid underdog tier. You've got 3 models. You can only really play it at 400 points. You can take it as allies for some things, so that might account for some of its wins. 28 games, 43% win rate. Next up, we have the Fellowship. Very similar to Thorins Company here. I definitely put it in underdog. It has 238 games, so nice to see that the classic Fellowship is popular because that's exactly how it should be. It's got a 43% win rate, so not too bad. You got the 9 models. You can play it at a couple different points levels, but as an all-hero army, it's going to struggle. Next up, in 60th place, we have Theodred's Guard Legendary Legion. I definitely would have put this one in the good tier. It's an interesting kind of combined arms Rohan style Legendary Legion. While Theodred's alive, everyone's immune to courage, so that's great, but he has to charge, so he always wants to get into danger while you want to keep him alive. So it's a really fun and interesting one to go up against. Definitely encourage people to play it. And a 44% win rate, it's not too bad. It's got 54 games under its belt. Now, next up in the 59th place is the Breaking of the Fellowship Legendary Legion. I still have this one solidly in underdog tier. It has 93 games, and this is basically the Fellowship at Armont Hensley, or get some special rules from their bonuses from Galadriel. 93 games, 44% win rate. Yeah, very similar to the Fellowship, maybe just a little bit more powerful. 58th place is a really surprising one to me. This one was probably, I would say, solidly in the good tier, and that's the Iron Hills. Iron Hills have 259 games with only a 44% win rate. Now, a lot of people like to say that the Hobbit factions are more powerful. I completely disagree, and I think the statistics on this one definitely shows. I think that people often are saying that Iron Hills are too powerful, but obviously from their track record, we can see they're not. Now, next up in 57th place, we have Barad-dûr. Barad-dûr is an interesting one. It's got 141 games with a 44% win rate. I'd probably put it in the good tier. It's led by Sauron, so you're probably only seeing it at higher points. It is difficult to win because Sauron can get tied down so easily, and he's so many points that, you know, if he gets tied down, the rest of the army can't really hit that hard. But it is a super cool thematic list. Definitely encourage everyone to play it because, you know, Sauron is the Lord of the Rings. That's exactly how it should be. Next up in 56th place, we have another one that I would rank an underdog, and that is Barad-dûr. That is Fangorn. We just talked about Barad-dûr. Fangorn has 142 games and a 44% win rate. So Fangorn is all of the Ents. In pure Ents, you're running super low model count, and you can really see that trend in a lot of these army lists that we've gone through so far. Low model count armies, particularly the all-hero ones, I'm talking, you know, between 5 to 15 models, are really, really struggling in the statistics. The cool thing is oftentimes they're the more thematic ones, so it's a lot of fun to play them. Next up in 55th place, now this ties back to what I was saying with the Iron Hills, we have Azogs Legion. I'd solidly put this in the good tier. It's 230 games with a 45% win rate. Lots of people like to say Azog's too powerful, but clearly his Legion isn't performing too well. Now, I think there's a few reasons for that. There's a lot of monsters in Azogs Legion, quite a few different ways to build it. It does have one of the best army bonuses in the game, but the regular troops are kind of where it's let down and struggle a little bit. Now, I recently played an Azogs Legion Battle Report on this channel, and it did pretty well. So feel free to check that out if you want to see just one way to play them. Next up in 54th, I have a top tier army. So it's really interesting to see it so low down with 182 games and 45% win rate is the Fiefdoms. Fiefdoms have Prince Imrahil, easily one of the best heroes in the game. I spoke on the Into the West podcast recently, and he came in second place as the best hero. He's a 12-inch banner, so really interesting to see it such low down, especially when I think it's so powerful. But I guess that's you know, the statistics say that. I think a good player could easily win tournaments with this. When I played in Ardor Unleashed 2019, I came second place to the Fiefdoms army, and that was one of the bigger tournaments in Australia at the time. And in 53rd place, we have Radagast's Alliance. Now, this one is one that I would put in underdog tier. Again, it's a super low model count army, keeping with our trend. It's Radagast and Eagles, basically. Now, it is fantastic at some scenarios. It comes in with 87 games and 45% win rate. It's really, really highly mobile, and it's got a solid wizard in it. But ultimately, the Eagles only have 2 attacks, and they have those massive bases. So if they don't have the charge, they can lose fights really, really easily and just get ripped to pieces. In 52nd place, we have another one that I would put in underdog. So far, there hasn't been that many discrepancies except for the Fiefdoms, and that's Rangers of Mirkwood with 102 games and a 46% win rate. In the Rangers of Mirkwood, you're relatively low model count, not as low as the all-hero ones, because your troops are very expensive, and they're all defense 3, which is pretty bad. You are 100% bows, but because your guys are so expensive, you don't actually have that many shots still. You do have tricks with the Sentinels, but ultimately it comes down to defense 3 troops that are something like 12 points each. It's just hard to compete when you're that expensive and that easy to kill. Next up, in 51st place, an army that I'd be putting this one in the good tier. With 74 games, 46% win rate, is the Army of Dunland. This is a legendary legion that has Thryden and all the new Dunland things. One of the relatively newer expansions in the game. This is a super cool army list to play. It's really fun at hitting hard. Doesn't have as many tools and tricks as some of the other ones, but you know, at 46%, where it is, yeah, 46%, you know, that's very close to 50%, so that's pretty reasonable. Next up in 50th place, a good tier army is Numenor. Numenor has some great heroes. They've got 220 games with a 47% win rate, so we're closing in on that 50%, which sort of should be the target for these army lists. Numenor has some great heroes. It's got Elendil and Isildur who can hit really hard, but the troops don't have a lot other than that. So yeah, look, not surprised to see where it is. I put it in the good tier, and 47% win rate fits in the good tier for sure. Next up with 49th place, we have the Grand Army of the South Legendary Legion. So this has 81 games and 47% win rate. For the Grand Army of the South, you have to have a Mumak in it. Then you can either take Suladan or the Mumak War Leader. Great to see Mumak's doing pretty well. 47% is a great result. And yeah, look, that's about what I'd expect. Mumaks definitely have their limitations. They're pretty good, but they can definitely get slowed down by some things. So this is a good spot for it. Next up in 48th place, we have maybe this is not a talk. Nah, I'll call this good tier. We have Cirith Ungol Legendary Legion. This is basically the little castle that kidnaps Frodo when he gets stabbed by Shelob. So in this, Shelob gets a bunch of bonuses. You can take Mordor Orcs and Mordor Uruk-hai. So it's really cool, really thematic, a super fun one that you can make out of all metal models. So it's a really can be a very premium army to collect. And look, 47% win rate's great. I would expect that this one has a 47% win rate with 51 games, mainly at lower points. I kind of think once you go past 500, it starts to struggle a little bit because at 500 points, people start to bring bigger and bigger things. So I'm assuming it's mainly played at low points level there, where it's just a really great all-rounder army. And next in 47th place is a very controversial list. It's the Vanquishers of the Necromancer. This one is simultaneously in the top tier and the underdog tier. It entirely depends on the matchup. Personally, it's my least favorite aspect of the whole entire game. Basically, you cap out at 5 models, but they essentially become entirely unkillable. It's like Elrond, Gandalf, Saruman, Galadriel, and Radagast. They just get too many bonuses, so they will win basically every single game. If it's just a straight up fight, they will kill their opponent. The reason they only have a 48% win rate is because there's obviously more to the game than just killing each other. You need to go and get objectives. The reason I really, really don't like this army list is because if I bring a really well-balanced army list that's good at every scenario, that's the kind of army that should be able to win a tournament. But if I just get unlucky and I get drawn against Vanquishers of the Necromancer into the death, that's my tournament scrapped. So yeah, not a fan of that one. 48% win rate is kind of fair enough. It is unbeatable sometimes, but it's easy to beat other times. Next up in 46th place, we have the second most popular faction in the game. It's solid good tier, and that is Minas Tirith. 812 games, 48% win rate. Everyone knows Minas Tirith. Everyone likes Minas Tirith. Second most popular. 48% is, hey, that sounds good out of 800 games. You know, that's pretty close to 50%, so can't be unhappy about that. Next up in 44th place is one of my favorite armies in the game, and that is the Army of Thror. I solidly put it in the good tier. It's not top tier. Comes in with 202 games played with it and a 49% win rate. Next up in 43rd place is the Shire. So it's really interesting that the Defenders of the Shire Legendary Legion doesn't get played anywhere near as much as the Shire. Now the reason I think that is because in the regular Shire you can take allies, and that's where I think most of these army lists are going to be used. So of the Shire, that is. 133 games, 49% win rate. It's a really easy way to drop an extra 25, 30 models into like maybe a low model count elf army to bring your bodies up. Obviously with that, it does make your army very easy to break though. Next up in 42nd place with 708 games, one of the more popular ones, 49% win rate. This is an army I put in the good tier, and that is Rivendell. Now I'm really glad to see this has 708 games under its belt because it's quite a difficult army to collect. Just the models come in these difficult packs and some of the heroes are difficult to find, so great that it's still popular despite that. 708 games is good, 49% win rate, pretty interesting. That's about what I would expect for it. It's not the best out there, it's not broken in any way, and it's very well balanced. So that's great, that's where it should be. Now, 41st place, the most popular faction of the game is Mordor with 899 games and a perfect 50% win rate. So that's what we want. The most popular faction, having the one with the most data being 50% means that, you know, that's in a very healthy spot. Mordor gives you so many options. You can play like this weird mix of evil magic guys or a mix of just guys that are good at hitting. So it's hard to categorize Mordor as one thing because there's so many different options with it. Next up, in 40th place, we have the Chiefs Ruffians with only 24 games and a 50% win rate. Let's take this one with a grain of salt. It's basically Sharkeys Rogues, but with a couple extra heroes and a couple extra special rules that I don't actually think improve it. It's definitely an underdog tier. I think the only reason it has a 50% win rate is because at low points you can take a lot of models. But ultimately, I think 50% win rate is very lucky for the Chief Ruffians. I reckon if it had 100 games played with it, it would probably drop down to a 35% win rate, something like that. So definitely an underdog tier. Next up in 39th place, this is a surprising one. This is a top tier list in my eyes. That's the Corsairs of Umbar. 118 games, 50% win rate. Corsairs are very tricky to play right, and I think that's why they only have a 50% win rate. We've seen them win big tournaments here in Australia, like Arda Unleashed, but at the same time, if a new player brings them, it's going to be really hard to perform with them. So, yeah, I mean, that sounds good to me. Let's jump into 38th place, and that's the Easterlings. So the Easterlings have 265 games played with them, 51% win rate, so pretty balanced. I'd put them in, I put them in good tier because this is not their Legendary Legion. The Legendary Legion that came out with Defense of the North is going to be a little bit higher above that. Easterlings have great troops, great heroes. Rutabi's amazingly cost effective. Amda's great at hero hunting, and of course the Dragon Emperor is absolutely amazing with the 12-inch banner and giving us guys +1 fight. Next in 37th, we have the Depths of the Moria Legendary Legion. This is basically a Legendary Legion built around the Balrog, so it takes Moria's vast array of options and shrinks them down to basically just the Balrog and regular guys and a couple other little things. It does make the Balrog a little bit more powerful, but, it takes away, I think, the stronger parts of Moria, which is everything else. It has 85 games played with it, 51% win rate. I'd put it in the good tier. Next up, in 36th place, we have Lothlorien. This is a really interesting one because Lothlorien won Ardacon, I think it was last year, the biggest tournament in the world. So we know that it can perform well in the best players' hands. It has 546 games with a 51% win rate, but a perfect example that a good player can win with any army list. It can win the biggest tournament in the world with any army list. I would definitely put it in the good tier. It's probably not top tier for me personally because it's lacking quite a few things like some hitting power and mounted heroes, things like that. But it has a lot of tricks with Galadriel and Sentinels. Next up, in 35th place, we have Moria, 462 games and a 51% win rate. Moria is one of my favorite factions of the game. You have a lot of models, but you also have all these cool options. You have trolls, you have bat swarms, you've got the Balrog, a dragon, the Watcher in the Water, cave drakes, so many options of cool monsters. If you want a monster mash, Moria is the list to go with. 51% win rate. I put her in the top tier. Personally, might be a little bit biased. The Bat Swarm, one of the Moria units, is my pick for one of the best in the game. And yeah, 51% win rate. I think it could be a bit higher. Come on, guys. Next up, we have 34th place, the Garrison of Dale. Only 33 games, so not very popular. 52% win rate. Now, the Garrison of Dale is one of those army lists that at certain points is really good. At 500 points, I can think of 3 or 4 tournaments in Australia that the Garrison of Dale has taken out. 2 of the tournaments that I've personally run have been won by Garrison of Dale. So it's really, really good at 500 points. I do think it's tricky to play because it seems like it has very restricted options, and it does, but if you play it well, you can get around that. Now, that being said, you can also play the Garrison of Dale with the new heroes that came out in Defense of the North. So the ones that I was talking about was just taking Girion and guys from Dale, but recently it got a couple extra models. And I think that those couple extra models being added probably brings down its win rate because I don't think they're as good as taking Girion. Next up, in 33rd place, we have the Variags of Khand with 156 games. Wow. 52% win rate. I'd put Variags of Khand probably an underdog tier, maybe. I think it might be a controversial underdog tier placement for me. I think a lot of people like it. It's an all-metal army, very difficult to collect, so 156 games is really impressive given how expensive it is and how rare some of those models are. Everyone's defense 4, so that's tricky. It's all mounted, which is great, and it can take 100% bows, which is really helpful. So it is very tricky to play it right. 52% win rate. I'd take that if I was Variags of Khand. That's pretty good. Next up, in the 32nd place, with 72 games, we have the Rise of the Necromancer Legendary Legion. This one for me is similar to the White Council Legendary Legion. It's called the Vanquishers of the Necromancer. In some scenarios, it's next to unbeatable. In other scenarios, it's pretty bad. It plays best at 1,000 points, where you can take the Necromancer and all 9 spirits. And less than that, I feel like it's not playing the theme as well. But, you know, it's still very strong, just low model count, but so far the highest of the super low model count armies. All right, next up in 32nd place, 478 games, a top tier list for sure, and that's Angmar. Angmar has won the Articon Invitational, which is one of the most competitive tournaments in the world. Angmar here only has a 52% win rate. Now, this is a really interesting one, and we could talk about this all day, go into all the detail about it, but basically the reason it's here at 52%, but I have it as a top tier army, is because it's really difficult to play exactly correct. It has Gulliver, who's 200 points, and he can kill basically anything, but he doesn't have the regular tools that people use to win the game. Like, he doesn't have Heroic Strike, and he only has Defense of 5, so you need to use the whole army to support each other, otherwise it can fall apart really quickly. It relies on mastery of magical abilities, knowing when to go in and being able to keep your heroes safe, so that's why it's down at 52%, but it's definitely one of those ones that you could win, you know, the most competitive tournament in the world with. Next up, in 30th place, we have Azogs Hunters with 307 games and a 53% win rate. I'd put this in the good tier. You've got Azog or Bolg, or both, 2 very solid heroes. You've got 3 of the best mid-tier heroes that are 50 points each and with 3 might each, in Yazneg, Narzug, and Fimble the Hunter. Nearly forgot him. And then all of your troops are strength 4 to attacks. So it hits really hard, but it's got really low courage and really low defense. So interesting to see where it's ended up there. Next up, in 29th place, we have the Blackgate Opens Legendary Legion with 92 games and a 53% win rate. I put this one in the good tier. I actually have a battle report that might already be out, but might be coming out soon with this army. In this one, you basically get a boosted up Troll Chieftain who can be really good, but other than that, you just have Orcs and Morannons. If your Orcs are outnumbering an opponent in a fight, they get +1 to wound. So if you take a Horde, you can really do a lot of work with the Blackgate Opens. Now, next up, in 28th place, we have a really solid army list, 141 games, 54% win rate, Defenders of Helm's Deep Legendary Legion. I put this one in the good to top tier. You have to take Aragon and Theoden, and then it's, you know, the thematic defense of Helm's Deep. You can't take any cav with it, so your mobility is limited, but all of your bows, all your elven bows do get +6 inches to their range, which doesn't really come up that much. 30-inch range is, you know, it's pretty good. And the throwing spears count as regular spears as well. So you can just have a really solid line of troops that are good at doing damage. You can take just a bunch of elven archers, and it's more elven archers than you usually could take because, you know, it's 1/3 can be elves, but all of them can have a bow, and then the other 2/3 is all Rohan guys who are cheaper. So it's a solid, really fun, really cool thematic one to play, and 141 games is decent play out of that one. Next, in 27th place, this one really surprises me. This is very much an underdog tier list for me, and that's the Dark Denizens of Mirkwood with 103 games and a 54% win rate. The Dark Denizens only have 1 hero, and that's the Spider Queen, so they have very limited might to be able to control the game and control movement with, and it's basically all spiders and monsters. With only 1 hero, if this army breaks, basically everything flees the battlefield, which feels really bad when your guys run away from the battlefield. But a 54% win rate's pretty impressive on this. I would find, or my guess is that if it breaks, it loses. If it doesn't break, it's able to really win. And you've got a lot of paralyze ability in there with the Mirkwood Spiders, and a lot of tricks as well with the Wargs, with the Bat Swarm, which I talked about in Moria, is one of my favorite units in the game. Next, in 26th place, now this one is an interesting one. I think it appears a lot as an ally, and that's why it comes up so much. So I think a lot of these 160 games is from being allied in, and that's the Misty Mountains, which is Gwaihir and the Elves, and they have a 55% win rate. There's a lot of lists that just drop Gwaihir in as a support piece, and that would contribute to the Misty Mountains statistics. A 55% win rate, if it's in that case of lists with Gwaihir allied in, isn't actually great. A lot of people talk about how much they love Gwaihir, how powerful he is, but you know, maybe that's just dragged down by when people play it purely, and you've only got a half dozen eagles, and they only have 2 attacks each if they don't charge. So if they, you know, they lose fights very easily, and then from there, you know, they get torn to pieces. Next up, with 25 in 25th place, 374 games, very popular, 55% win rate, is the Riders of Theoden. So this is the charge at the Pelennor Fields. 55% win rate's fair enough. I'd put this one in the top tier still. You got a lot of heroes, you got a lot of resources. You have regenerable resources with Gambling's Banner. You can take all Royal Guard, who are really efficient on their horses. So yeah, definitely top tier for me. It is tricky to play all cav armies right. It's not something I'd recommend for beginners who are trying to play competitively. I'd say start with something else and then move into all cav. So maybe that contributes it to only being 55%. But hey, 55% is good. That's, that's a very reasonable number. That's within a good deviation. Next up, 24th place. This one surprises me. This is probably an underdog tier list in my mind, and it's 129 games and a 55% win rate from Ugluk's Scouts. So Ugluk's Scouts is the part in the movies where Ugluk and the orcs meet up and they're kidnapping Merry and Pippin and they get attacked by Rohan. Now Ugluk's Scouts quite similar to Lurtz's Scouts, which is why I'm so surprised that there's such a big difference between them. I actually probably prefer Lurtz's Scouts because it has a lot of the same tools, but it doesn't have the orcs who are slower. So in Ugluk's Scouts, half your army is Uruk-hai, they're very fast moving, half your army is orcs and they're sort of slower. But you do get bonuses if they're fighting together. It just seems difficult to get them in the same fight together. So I'd put an underdog, but obviously does all right. 23rd place is the Paths of the Druadan Legendary Legion. This is the Wozes, the Druadan, who are in the last place, basically allied with Rohan, and they give you quite a few special rules there. It's only 18 games with a 56% win rate. I'd probably put it in the good to underdog tier. I don't know, it's rough. I don't personally like it that much, but I know some really good players who've taken it to big tournaments and done all right with it. So with only 18 games, I think we can't really take that positioning too seriously. Now in 22nd place, this one I think is similar to the Misty Mountains. I don't think that these 71 games from the White Council are from pure lists. I think a lot of them are from people allying in Saruman to other lists. So 71 games at a 56% win rate from the White Council. If it was pure, I guarantee you this would be significantly lower because they're one of the more difficult all-hero armies to win with, and all-hero armies are already very difficult to win with. So next up in 21st place, we have the Halls of Thranduil. Now this is a good tier list, 344 games, 56% win rate. Thranduil is an absolute beast. So not surprising to see that it has a very positive win-loss ratio. It is a difficult army to collect, so it's good that it still has 344 games with it. It's got a lot of the same tricks as Lothlorien, as in it's got the Sentinels, it's got a bit of magic, but it has some really, really high hitting power as well, which I think is why it outperforms Lothlorien. Next up in 20th place with 120 games is the Pits of Dol Guldur. This is kind of like the intersection between Azog's Legion and Dol Guldur as a legendary legion. Azog gets free heroic combats, and you get a once per game automatic win a heroic move roll off, which is super powerful, and you also get resistant to magic. So it really makes Azog a lot stronger. 120 games, so it's decently popular. 56% win rate means it's doing pretty well, but there are situations where if the enemy has a wizard, even if Azog's getting resistant to magic, that wizard can still get several spells through and shut him down for a few turns. So makes sense that it's not any higher, makes sense that it's not any lower. Next, in 19th place with 177 games is Goblin Town. I'd put Goblin Town in the good to top tier. 56% win rate. Goblin Town's great. You can put so many models down on the table. They're so easy to kill, but you've got so many of them. And the Goblin King is a really, really solid high hitting power unit. They really struggle with their courage. Everyone's at courage too. So if you break, a lot of models do run away, which is never ideal. But as we had really low model count armies in the bottom of the ranking, this is a really high model count army. And it's the reason that those low model count armies struggle, because it can just put more bodies on objectives. Next up in 18th place is the Assault on Helm's Deep Legendary Legion with 165 games and a 56% win rate. This is a different way of playing Isengard. It's no named heroes, and all of the siege weapons and bombs get a big boost in power. Personally, it's not my favorite one to play against because it can feel really bad to get hit by a ballista, but it obviously performs really well. You can just put a lot of bodies on the table, a lot of Uruk-hai on the table, and then you can snipe out heroes with the ballistas. And because you can put so many Uruk-hai on the table, you can put so many crossbows on the table, so it's one of the strongest shooting armies in the game. Now next up, in 17th place, now this one is one that I think a lot of people would argue is the top of the top tier, maybe one of the best army lists in the game. Has 270 games and it's 57% win rate. That's the Assault on Lothlorien. This is one of the newest Legendary Legions to come out, and it basically has a special rule that everyone's range is limited to 12, except for the goblins in the Assault on Lothlorien, and they get +1 to wound with their shooting, and there's a bunch of monsters and a bunch of magic. It's got a lot of special rules that make it very special and very difficult to play against. I think in the hands of a very good player, this could be the best list. Straight up, no doubt about it. It's going to be interesting seeing how Articon goes. I'm expecting to see a lot of these Assault on Lothlorien lists there, and I'll be surprised if one is in the podium. I won't be surprised if one is in the top podium there. Next, in 16th place with 82 games and a 58% win rate, is the Black Riders Legendary Legion. This is the so far highest of the all-hero armies. It's the 9 wraiths, and they get a bunch of bonuses for just taking the 9 vanilla wraiths. So very thematic, very cool. Bit of a pain to play against because it really attacks the enemy courage, and it's very difficult to charge them, and they can just run around throwing spells at you all day long. But at the end of the day, it's still difficult to take objectives. So impressed to see this at 58%. It's doing pretty well. Now next up, in 15th place, we have Erebor Reclaimed, 229 games and a 59% win rate. Erebor Reclaimed is in the top tier for me. It's got 2 of the best heroes in the good side. It has Thorin, King Under the Mountain, who is an absolute bargain for how much damage he puts out, and it's got Biffa, the champion of Erebor, who can get free heroic moves with a 65-point model, so it's absolutely fantastic. And then you've got the Iron Hill troops that are solid all around, and a bunch of other hero options. So it's in a really good, healthy spot there. Next, in 14th place, we have Helm's Guard, 71 games and 60% win rate. If it's 500 points and below, I put this in the top tier. If it's kind of above that, it falls into good. If it gets into 750, still in the good tier, yeah. Helm gets a free point of might per turn and a free heroic combat every turn. So he is an absolute beast. He's just really easy to shut down with magic, and he only has fight 5, so he really needs to rely on using heroic strike. The rest of the army is solid, but nothing to rave home about. So that's why it's in this position. I would not be surprised if most of its wins are at those low points. Next up, 13th place, we're getting close to the top 10 here, is the Beornings Legendary Legion. 353 games, very popular, 60% win rate. I put this in the top tier for sure. The bears are very, very solid. You've got basically 2 monsters that are almost unkillable, practically unkillable, and decent troops, but the troops just hang back while the monsters go in there, the bears go in and hopefully kill everything, and then you've got a couple guys to run around and grab objectives. It's really solid. I've seen it win a lot of tournaments, I've seen it do well at a lot of other tournaments, so no surprise to see it there. Next up, in 12th place, only 87 games, less than I would have guessed, is the Survivors of Lake Town with a 60% win rate. They're in top tier as well for me. You've got Bard, who gives some amazing bonuses to the army. You've got good heroes all around, you've got lots of synergies, and you've got lots of bodies. They can also ally into a lot of other lists and just boost the numbers massively, so they're really good for that. 60% win rate is pretty solid for them. They have won Articon in the past, the world's biggest tournament, so hey, pretty fair effort. Next up, in 11th place with a 505 games, that's a lot, we have the Serpent Horde with a 60% win rate. I put them solidly in the good tier. You can get a lot of models on the table with a lot of bows and a lot of cool tech units, but everything's super low defense. Bit of a glass cannon army, this one. Great to see it performing so well. Interesting that it's Legendary Legion, the Grand Army of the South, performs much worse than it. I think that indicates that the Mumak is the fun choice, but maybe not the most competitive choice, because I assume if you're taking the Mumak, you're probably taking the Legendary Legion. Now next, we're into the top 10 now. 10th place is Dol Guldur with a 61 games and a 61% win rate. 61 games isn't a heap, so not the most reliable statistics, but hey, fair enough. Dol Guldur performs very well. You've got the Necromancer, you've got good troops, you've got Castellans. I played a battle report against it recently, and it annihilated me. So, look, fair enough for Dol Guldur. I'd put it in, would I put it in the top tier? I put it in the good tier. Although I haven't put many things in the top tier, so I'm pretty selective there. Next up, 9th place. I've recently played this army a lot. It's one of those ones that in 500 points, it's in the top tier. More than that, I think it's in the good tier. 222 games, 62% win rate from Far Harad. I'm surprised that this has got 222 games. Again, it's a really rare, difficult to collect army, so fantastic that it's as popular as it is. I'm really happy about that. I'm playing it. I absolutely love it. It's got this cavalry that when they charge, they instantly do a strength 4 hit. If they kill you, they can keep going and charge again. which is probably the defining thing about it. It's very powerful. Now, most of the troops are courage 2. All the troops are courage 2, but if a hero is in combat, all models within 6 inches of it auto pass courage, so it really has a lot of gives and takes. It's great if your heroes are alive, very powerful, but if you can kill the heroes, then you can really break the army and make it run away. So a really fun one with a lot of play to it. Next, with 169 wins, 8th place, 62% win rate, is the host of the Dragon Emperor. Yeah, this one doesn't surprise me. This is probably the top one going around at the moment. Definitely a top tier list. It's the Dragon Emperor. He has 5/5 Easterlings basically that aren't that many points. You've got a drum, so it's all very fast moving. You've got other great heroes like Rutabi and Borgia. I think just about everyone who's played at tournaments will not be surprised that this one's up there at the top. I put it in the top tier for sure as well. Now, as we get past here, we have quite a lot of armies that have less games, so we'll see how that goes with these win rates. Next, in 7th place, 37 games, 64% win rate, the Wolves of Isengard. This is the legendary legion led by Shaku. It's the attack on the road to Helm's Deep. I put this one solidly in the underdog tier. I think a lot of these wins would come from very low points games, and I think that a lot of them would be in just objective scenarios. So I would really struggle to see Wolves of Isengard winning a tournament, but I think it could win a lot of games, but it's always going to come up against a scenario that it will lose in. So it performs really well. Obviously 37 games isn't much. Again, it's very difficult to collect. You can go with the plastic wire grinders. They're not the best models in the world though, so you can go with the metal ones, but they're very difficult to get a hold of. I'd love to own this army one day. 100% would love to own it. Now in 6th place, 40 games, we have the Defenders of Erebor with a 64% win rate. I put this one in the good tier. It's the Erebor and Dale alliance that fights against the Easterlings during the War of the Ring. I'm surprised it does so well. It doesn't have a heap of games, so obviously there's higher variance there. But there's quite a bit of synergy in it. Not a heap, it's expensive troops. There's a little bit of counter synergy in it. So yeah, impressed that it's so high. It's in the good tier. Now this next one, it's not technically in the rank. It only has 14 games. It's literally my pick for the worst Legendary Legion gameplay-wise, as in so hard to win a game with. It's got 14 games, 8 wins, so 64% win rate, and that's the Men of the West Legendary Legion. This is basically the group of men who go to the Black Gate to distract Sauron from Frodo's final journey into destroying the ring. It's unfortunately just trash. Now, I say that because it's an alliance between Gondor, Rohan, and Fiefdoms, but Gondor, Rohan, and Fiefdoms outside the Legendary Legion can be allies anyway, and the Men of the West just restricts your options. You can't take any horses, you can't take a lot of the really elite troops that you want to be taking, and its ability is, I'm pretty sure everyone auto-passes courage. That's great, and once per game, everyone within 12 inches of Aragorn gets +1 fight value, which sounds great, but you're already taking troops that aren't great at fighting. You're going from fight 3 to fight 4 a lot of the time. Some of them are fight 4 to fight 5, which is good, but it's only one turn. The really cool thing about it is you can take Imrahil with the Swan Knights, and they can go from fight 4 base, fight 5 if they're within 3 of Imrahil, and then fight 6 on this turn. So that's kind of cool. There's actually definitely a solid use case for that. Maybe that's how they got some of their wins, but it's very difficult to use. Okay, now we're up to the top 5. None of these have a heap of games. So 5th place, we have the Army of Dale, 30 games, 65% win rate. This is the Dale Legendary Legions. This is how you would play Dale if you're not taking Girion, you're just taking the new guys. Basically for free, they got Swarm Protector, so everyone auto passes courage, which is huge. Not many games, so a couple tournament wins in there, and that'll definitely swing the statistic. It's very powerful, but I think it's strong without the 2 heroes. I put it in the good tier, whereas I put Dale in the top tier. I'm telling you all this, but it obviously performs a lot better, but it has less games. So take it with a grain of salt. Now, 4th place is another interesting one. We have Smaug. I put Smaug in the underdog tier. He has 22 games and a 66% win rate. Smaug's one of those ones where he might be able to win 66% of his games, but he will never win a tournament. That's because there's always going to come up with a scenario like domination, and he's only one model. He just can't compete in all the scenarios, but he can win a lot of games, but in a 5 or 4 game tournament, he won't be able to win all of them. Similar to the Vanquishers of the Necromancer, but a lot more cool because it's Smaug, so I'm much happy to play against Smaug and Vanquishers. Now, top 3. Top 3 is interesting. There are going to be some big surprises in here. First one is the Fell Beings of Mirkwood Legendary Legion. I put this one in the good tier. It's good. Geordie, who I play a lot of battle reports against, he'll put this in the top tier. He was telling me about why it's so good, and it's you've got the Spider Queen, who's fantastic. You've got that random big orc captain whose name I can't remember, who's pretty good. You've got orcs and spiders mixed together. Now your orcs can take an orc drummer, so they can move fast. The spiders and bat swarms can give you a lot of tech, and then the Spider Queen can hit really, really hard. So you've got a lot of boxes ticked there. 61 games and a 67% win rate, so definitely performing very well. Now, second place, we have one that really stands out a lot because this one actually has quite a few games. It's 114 games, and this is starting to get a little bit egregiously bad. I'm not happy to admit that there is a faction with a 73% win rate here in Middle-earth. It's the Army of Laketown. This is one that's great at low points, bad at high points. I would guess most of these wins are in the 500 point range. It's definitely top tier at 500 points and can probably perform still above that, but not as effectively. So we'll put it in the top tier still. It did win the UK Masters a couple years ago, so it has a proven track record. Army of Laketown, really, really solid this tier. You can take the Master, who can give a 12-inch banner that also gives +1 to wound. It costs him a point of might though. It's just a lot of bodies who are still decently good at fighting and a lot of resources to allocate around. So the Master can get extra might points from Alfred, and then Braga can get free might points. You can take a lot of captains. So there's a lot of resources, a lot of bodies, and they're all pretty decent. Now, the next one is an underdog army, to be honest. First place is an underdog army. It blows my mind. 60 games, so not a heap. If you think, that's a couple really good experienced players can play 60 games in a couple tournaments. So I think that's what it must be. It's Arnor, 60 games and an 80% win rate. That's 80% is insane. And maybe people will say, "Oh, we need to run around. We need to nerf Arnor. Arnor is too good." I'm telling you, that's not the case. That's not the case at all. I put them in the underdog tier. They're good at low points, but they struggle to get above that. They've got only a couple troop types that have really low courage. They don't have a big hitting hero. They're solid all around, very points effective, and that's similar to Army of Laketown, points effective. 80% win rate is insane though. I guarantee you this is not the best army in the game. I promise it's not 80% on paper, it's 80% in practice, which means there's some really good experienced players who must love taking their army, their Arnor army out and playing games with it. And I still think it's good. Don't get me wrong. I don't think it's the worst army in the game. I would love to own it one day. But I think 80% is punching well above its weight. And hey, that's the whole list. This has been Conquest Creations. Let me know what you think down in the comments. I'm guessing there's going to be some big disagreements, big discussions. And thank you for watching.